Everybody's ready. We're going to kick this thing off.
Okay.
All right. Everybody's ready. Here we are. Another Bald Noggins Sunday. Yep. Mike, you know what Mike's doing. He's sporting it. And today we have a special guest. We don't have our typical Pastor John in here giving his message. Today we've got his brother Tim. And Tim is familiar with the Christian church and the Bible, and he's known to many as a prophet. I don't know if he will say that on this show. Probably no. He's saying, no, I'm not a prophet.
I'm a Polka Prophet.
He's a Polka Prophet, which kind of leads into who he is and the substack that he just started the other day. And he's now on X, and he's an author. So he's got the writing abilities, capabilities, and the wisdom. You probably recognize him from other shows we've done. He's been dealing with cancer, surviving cancer, and I guess you're into like 4 months of that without the industrial medical system.
Well, you're never done with those guys. You know, they're always
no visual means of support.
You know, you're never completely untethered. They want to. I looked up a statistic today. In the last 8 months of life, people usually spend about $80,000. They spend 40 grand at the first 8 months, and then they spend another 40 grand in the last 3 months. So just to give you an idea, if you're planning to check out, it's not cheap.
Check it out.
It's kind of like that survival instinct, you know, when you corner an animal. Like I had to get rid of my chickens the other day, and you corner them, and boy, they just fight. You know,
They fight you.
Yeah. I haven't got the rooster yet, but yeah.
Good luck with that.
Yeah.
You probably have to put a small child as a decoy so the rooster can attack.
Yeah. So that kind of, you know, putting that into human terms, you know, the way we fight is by throwing money at things, you know what I'm saying? So that's interesting.
You know, your body, you know, I mean, one of the big discoveries, big discovery that I made was after being sort of unconscious about my body for a long time, now I'm very conscious of it. And it's actually its own thing, you know, it's kind of its own entity. I mean, you have your brain and your heart and your soul and all that. But the body itself is its own entity, and it wants to live. You know, I mean, this is it. You know, the body wants to participate in this end of life, and so I find myself, you know, you deal with anxiety, and a lot of it just subliminal, just bubbling up stuff. You know, I mean, you can because I've had a number of straight up conversations on how long it's going to take me to die. You know what I mean? Like, and when they put it on a clock or a calendar, it's unnerving. We all say euphemistically, we're going to die and it's out there somewhere, but we don't have it in front of us because and all that stuff. My point is that I have to kind of understand that I have two games I can play. One game is a finite game. The other is an infinite game. Okay. So a lot of times those things, we don't pay attention to life in those terms. We have religions over here and that's over there. And we have everything kind of collated in a way or positioned in a way that we deal with them as we bump into them in the dark, like furniture, stuff like that. You know, oh, wow, I got to pay attention to this. Oh, I got to pay attention to that. So in the finite game, which is largely controlled by what I call elemental forces, the big things we can't see. We can't see government. We can't see religion. We can't see these things. They're abstract, but yet they have an impact on our lives. And so, but when you move into the infinite game, it's just you and God. You know, that's it. You know.
Hey, wait! You mean your pastor that's been telling you all this stuff for 50 years isn't there with you, kind of walking you through? Wow, that's a shock. You'd think they would be the way they talk, but I'm just saying.
Well,
who's your pastor, Mike?
Not going to say.
Oh, by the way, if I hadn't mentioned before, Mike is an internet pastor, certified
I
nonetheless.
definitely won't be there when you meet the Lord. Just FYI.
Make sure
not
you bring
making-
your cards.
Yeah. I mean, he married my daughter, Andy.
That's right. They're still together too.
They're still together. It shows he's got some sticking power. Those words work.
Woohoo!
I think, but back on this, death is, just you. You're the one that's dying. Everybody else just watching. So it's kind of interesting when you move from the objective to the subjective. You're the subject. You're not watching somebody and all that sort of stuff. So it kind of adds an interesting measure to it. My wife said this morning, she said, well, Tim, the way you're approaching it is you're going to have to get around the mountain one way or the other. There's the mountain. The mountain's the cancer now. On one side of the mountain's the doctors and the hospitals and the chemo and all that stuff. On the other side of the mountain is you.
It's a cliff. No.
Well, on the other side of the mountain is there's two paths around the mountain. Let me put it more.
Right.
One path leads, you go through the medical community. The other path, you make a decision to kind of go on your own. And last, couple of weeks ago, I guess, 2 or 3 weeks ago, I had another second opinion guy and very good people, nice, concerned, all that stuff. Very, very empathetic. And I found that myself, it just freaked me out because I wanted certainty about life. And suddenly this guy's just given me dates and times and places. And, well, Tim, if you do this, it'll be maybe a year or so. And if you do that, maybe it'll be 5 years. He says, you have a 50-50 chance. He says, go on this path with chemo and all that. You got a 50-50 chance. I says, what do you mean 50-50? What's that look like? I says, well, he says 50% that, the chemo we're offering and the surgery and this and that, you'll be able to live beyond 5 years. I says, what's the other 50? He says, well, the cancer will jump the fence and basically you got a year to live.
Wow.
I said, oh, that's interesting. It's just scared the daylights out of me. And I found that when we're confronted with things, we think we got it all handled and everything's fine until somebody with a badge and a hat and a flashlight, with authority comes along and gives you the word, you will certainly die. There's no ifs, ands, or buts, and it's going to be within this time frame for these reasons. And so I came home and I was really shook up. I mean, I said, I actually signed up. I said, yeah, put the port in my shoulder. Let's do it, man. I'm scared to death. Well, by the morning, I'd woken up and I said, what the heck am I thinking? Because when you get chemo, it's, because I've been in and out of cancer places. You see the people shuffling in and shuffling out, man. It's brutal. It is freaking brutal. So I figured.
It just about kills you.
Well, I said, I told myself, I says, it's not just me going through chemo. It's me and my wife. And it says, the two shall become one. And I says, I just can't put her through that. And I asked the doctor, I said, look, if I take door number 2, which is Tim just on his own with his secret formulas, what does that look like? He said, well, you get this and that. I says, can you guys make it pretty painless and, easy slide out? He goes, oh, yeah. I said, okay, cool.
As long as it's painless, right?
As long as it's kind of painless, you know what I mean? But the thing is, that's happening is that I've really had to grapple with the idea of living now. And I found that a lot of everything is based on what's in the future. You guys were, we joked a little bit about the prophetic stuff in the beginning. Well, the prophets, like everybody else, are selling the future. So you can trade in your present idea, your present moment for whatever they're thinking or projecting about the future. And I'm not here to diminish any of that. But I, as Tim Honan, really don't understand how to live in the present. And for example, I write a lot and this and that. And lately I've been thinking about legacy and all this kind of thing. You know what that means? It's like I'm thinking about the future. I'm not writing now. I'm writing for then. I'm establishing a legacy. I'm doing this. I'm building a statue or a monument or a pile of money, whatever it is. And I realize I can't do that. I have to live right now be paying attention, because in a way, that's what Jesus did. He lived now. He was the expert of being now. Every time they tried to hook him into running a government or doing this or going here or doing that or going there, he lived on his own terms. He says, only do what I see the Father doing. And that was about today. That was about right now. Everything that Jesus did was about right now. It wasn't about the future, you know? And so I've sort of rebooted a lot of the way that even, you know, churches and Christian churches and stuff, everybody, because we're part of a system and a society, and we are still following good old Thomas Hobbes' rules that he penciled out in his great work called Leviathan, which is basically, you know, the king rules, the king talks to God. So whatever the king says goes. And that's pretty much the way we work. I served in the army. I would join the military. I was a politician. I've been a lot of different things. And I realized that all that stuff is I became really, you know, halfway good at the finite game, but not good at the infinite game, because somehow the infinite game got woven into the finite game, and the church became the church of do, not be. And I realized late in life that I really didn't know how to be. And I felt bad because I didn't know how to do that well. All the prescriptions for living and all that stuff. If you do this, you'll lose 40 pounds. And if you do that, you'll go here. And if you do, you know, and they kind of work, but there's not much, you know, it could be because I have not understood life very well. But at the same time, I've never, and this sounds a little crazy, my head's never been clearer. I've never felt as healthy. I've got my issues. You know, cancer's not, you know, gone. But at the same time, man, being alive is incredible. And being able to be here today, I mean, today, and everything that's happening, you guys talking, we're here right now. And there's so many things that want to rob us of right now, want to join things. We want to commit to things in the future. The future is an illusion. We have no idea what the future is, but we do have right now. And this is all we have. So my saying of late is that I have an infinite number of right nows, but I don't have much of a future, as they say. You know what I mean?
Well, that saying is all we have is now. I guess, isn't that a saying? Somebody came up with that, and
well, it's
and it's pretty.
I say that all the time.
But that's who said it. It was Mike.
Yeah.
The other day. Yeah.
But, you know, to live it, it's like when you get information about you're going to die, and then suddenly you begin to quantify what your right now looks like, and not, you know, in a silly way, but in a way that what got me out of my dilemma about dying and certainty is a big deal. That's what the kingdom of separation, the kingdom of the world offers, certainty, but it's never certain. If you get this, you'll get that 500-mile warranty or 10,000-mile, whatever, warranties and life insurance and all that stuff. We are constantly selling certainty, and we're geared to certainty. So when the doctor said you're going to die, a different doctor confirmed the other doctor, saying, yep, you know, well, if you'd done what they told you to do back in October.
Yeah, but they gave you a 3-month window to get you into that program, didn't they? So they wouldn't have gotten you in right away.
Well, the thing is, yeah, you know, and all that stuff aside, my point is that when you hear it and it's about you, logic is right out the window. You know, you're really talking about, you know, your own existence, you know, like, wow. And then all the ideas of faith and God and all those glorious abstracts, you begin to incorporate them in ways that are more tangible. So, and you clear the decks, you know, you clear things up, you figure things out, you know, you understand things you didn't understand before because they're important. You know, and so this thing is that we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but powers and principalities. you know, that's a big deal. Oh, so what does that mean? So most of my time when they're talking about chemo and this and that, I'm wrestling with flesh and blood. You know what I mean? Here I am. I'm wrestling with this thing, and I'm thinking, you know, and then, you know, excuse my French, you know, when the TV comes on and I find myself secretly saying, "Those sons of bitches," you know, suddenly I'm wrestling with, you know, these figures that seemingly do me harm or, you know, take money away from me or whatever's happening. I'm mad at them. Well, Jesus says, love your enemies. I'm thinking, well, how in the world do you love your enemies? That's impossible. That's craziness. But at the same time, as I think about it, it's about all you can do. Because suddenly, if we're not fighting with flesh and blood, there's a way, hey, you got to love your enemies. I'm thinking, okay, so everybody that's, you know, I've noticed lately that old white men are not held in high regard anymore for some reason. So being an old white man and on the backside of, you know, being a possible, you know, enemy of the state, as a terrorist,
yeah,
as a Christian, as, you know, right wing, I could be one of those people. But
the new face of domestic terrorism.
Domestic terrorism
right here.
Right here we are.
So you know, it becomes kind of like, well, who's my enemy? Well, a lot more people than there were last week, because we're totally geared to believe what we see on television. And I did some writing, and back to my Substack. So I have, let's frame that right now, so you can have, there's two channels of thinking that I have. So I've written a lot, and I'm making sure that I can move these ideas into the market, you know, into the world, into the marketplace, whatever it is, the marketplace of ideas. And so on my Substack, it's called Polka Prophets at Substack. And basically, my first story was apostolic experiments. And it's about a trip I took with a guy that said he was an apostle a long time ago, and, you know, through West Texas, and how he was seeing the kingdom of God. And it was a sort of an exploration of Christian structure function issues. A fun story. And then the second story is Fierce Tribes, the people we met. The first story is about an ordination of an apostle. And the second story is about a road trip with those two apostles through West Texas to establish the kingdom of God. And they took me along because I was interesting.
Now, Tim, I read the first one, and was that the guy that he ordains in the restaurant? You go with him and the other guy?
Yep. So we take
how the one that got ordained.
The second story, it's called Fierce Tribes. There's a second story out. So the third story is the third adventure with these guys. So I got, you know, wild hair one day reading the newspapers, and I was thinking about enemies because I was reading Tolstoy's book, The Kingdom of God is Within You, and it's all about Tolstoy's Christian conversion and his beginning thoughts of pacifism. So it was my beginning thoughts is, hey, new kingdom, new ideas. I said, pacifism, that's interesting. So basically, we went, and I said, you know what? And I read an article in the New York Times Sunday magazine by Michael Isikoff, and it was all about this revolutionary pacifist group in Serbia called Otpor, which means resistance in Serbo-Croatian. And I said to myself, we should go check that out, because that might have signs that it's Gandhi or the Mennonites or something. I says, you know, that might be one of these authentic moves of God, not something we gin up at church or something like that, but just something that just bubbles up like a natural spring. So I said, let's go there. So thankfully, the new apostles that I knew, one had I said, how do we get in there? So I did some checking, and they weren't letting anybody into Serbia unless you were journalists. So the apostle had a little TV show on some Christian TV station down in Midland, Texas. And he went to them and he got us journalist certifications. So when we sent our application for visas to travel to Serbia, and this is 5 or 6 months after we bombed it, okay?
There's no 1993 or
1999.
99. Okay.
Was that when we bought the Russian embassy?
Chinese.
Chinese, right. Close.
But
same geographic area.
So anyway, so the next episode is called so we got to go to Serbia. I met with the resistance leaders. We had a great time and we left. Okay, so but anyway, we did that, and but the interesting thing was that happened in 1999. So since 1999, a few things have unfolded in history. We had 9/11, the Iraq War, we had Afghanistan, we had the housing crisis, we had the pandemic, we had BLM riots, we had more stuff, we had all this stuff going on globally. And in the meantime, I'm just distracted. So one day I dug up that Serbia story. I went, wonder what happened, wonder what all that was about. So I looked up the group that we met with. That was a CIA funded operation. That was a color revolution thing. I got the background on everything that happened, and I remember my daughter, Molly, one day she was asked to assist Madeleine Albright, who was in Aspen at the time. And so Molly was her, handler, local liaison for a few talks that they were going to do there. So Molly had a nice time with a very nice lady and all this kind of stuff. Well, the outcome was, as I'm reading this about Madeleine Albright, this is interesting. Her name shows up in Serbia, and the Serbians had such distaste for her and her activities, political and otherwise, that they named a python at the Belgrade Zoo after her. And they put her bust with a big plaque of why they named this python Madeleine in the Belgrade Zoo. So that's the title of the story. It's called A Python Named Madeleine. So, but you go into all the players, and the thing is that made the bombing of the aftermath, because we're there, we see the buildings, and we have no idea of the information of the strategy and the ordnance used and all that stuff. All that stuff sort of flows out 15 years after the actual event. You have what really happened. Well, it was one of the few places they had to get they don't know if they got an exemption from the Geneva Convention to drop cluster bombs. Chris, tell us what a cluster bomb is.
Yeah, cluster bombs really very detrimental, because it's basically a bomb that launches small landmines into wherever it's dropped. So you're looking at an area that's just full of these unexploded ordnances, EIDs, whatever you want to call them. So yeah, and they'll go on for, you'll never clear that land again. There's always a potential of a landmine being somewhere in there that you just can't find. I mean, it's just
so it's one of the most heinous ordnance, that you can drop from an airplane. And the reason was, this was Wesley Clark, they pushed this to the nines. And the other thing that was fascinating was, I did a deep dive, and I'll cover it more, but it relates to the finite and the infinite, in the sense that we went to Serbia hating Serbians because they're bad people. They were in all the movies at that time, the Serbian mafia, the Serbian this, the Serbian, if you want a bad guy, the Serbians were the new Nazis. And so suddenly it was very easy to get public support, because we've been geared and propagandized for 5 years of how bad the Serbians were. Now, it's war. Now, I'm not saying that, this, that, or the other thing. The fascinating point in terms of why the Serbians did what they did is because the only place outside of Germany during World War II that there was a large concentration camp was in Serbia. And the Germans basically rounded up the Serbians and put them in concentration, 500,000 of them, and they were guarded by Bosnians. So that kind of, puts a check in everyone's relationship.
So this was during World War II, Tim?
Yeah, this is different, World War II. So
Right.
all this stuff simmers, though. It's never resolved. Basically Tito comes in, and then they're hard on the Bosnians and the Croats. You know what I mean? So it's just an unresolved conflict with ancient parameters. I mean, Pristina, for example, where Kosovo is, was basically where they stopped the Muslim invasion back in 1369. So these people live with long memories. And unresolved conflicts can cover hundreds and hundreds of years. So anyway, going into this conflict, I have no illusions about animosities on either side and the things they can do to each other. However, I'm going there based on old, Tolstoy's and his kingdom of God is within you. And so we go to Serbia, and not as missionary. It really wasn't a mission thing, but, it was to kick the tires and see if there's anything real in terms of a move of God per se. And I got to talk to the head of the Otpor people. We got all kinds of Otpor swag. And anyway, but that'll be in the story. But my larger point is that this whole thing was prepped for us to believe that they were enemies. We were saturated with information from Hollywood, from the media, from here, from there. It was a very well orchestrated effort. So when it came time to bomb, they were full on. Yes, go get those people. And it was exactly the same format that was developed in 1917 by Woodrow Wilson and the Committee for Public Information. The reason our grandfather went to war after getting off the boat in 1916, going to France in 1918, was because of the United States was saturated with anti-German sentiment. The fact was the day we declared war, 2 million young men joined up that day to go fight the Germans. The other thing was that the Germans were 50% Lutheran and 50% Catholic.
What?
Yeah, so we had
covering all the bases.
Huh?
Covering all the bases. Got Lutherans, Catholics, a few anarchists maybe thrown in there just for good measure.
Well, the thing was that they were authorized by their governments to kill one another, and they did.
Yeah.
And it was one of the more brutal wars ever. So my point is that, as I investigate and reinvestigate these things, I've also found, that very contemporary, and that Otpor after 2000, in 2003 or 2004, the National Endowment for Democracy saw that there was some talent in that group, that Otpor group, and in Belgrade they formed a new NGO, and basically because they called Canvas, and there'll be stories out on this when this comes out, but what happened was that they figured out, because of Otpor, which was I'll call it a revolution in a can, because everybody knew how to do it. They were going off of a script, a nonviolent script. I'll have the information available, but it's basically inverting the kingdom of God is within you, nonviolence in a completely different way to subjugate and overthrow governments. So basically what you had in Ukraine in 2014, the Arab Spring.
Yeah, right. Remember
the
that.
Arab Spring, and then I think another one, color revolution in Venezuela, plus BLM riots in the United States. All these are very much revolutions in a can. They're very well funded. They're very well organized. And basically it is discontent compressed and weaponized so that you can overthrow a government, and you point it at the nation that you're in. So you get a bunch of people, you point it at the government, and it's really fascinating how it unfolded in this group Canvas since 2003 or 4 has basically exported the idea and been consultants on how to build color revolutions in countries. And a lot of it is, basically directed because they're getting most of their money from USAID and National Endowment for Democracy to the tune of about $125 to $100 million. They've been able to export these little color revolutions all over the world, so that the United States can destabilize the countries that they want without getting their hands dirty.
Now, are they still nonviolent, or are they?
Well, you just no more not as nonviolent as BLM.
Yeah, I mean, it's basically the new weapon of warfare now is propaganda. You get a movement of people, a large group like Color Revolution. Doesn't have to be a very large group, just enough to make a significant impact on society and enough media exposure, things like that. A small group could look like a
Yeah, they say a small group of well-trained people can destabilize a large. I've heard stories about different times where in the tipping point by what the heck's the guy's name? I can't remember now, but the book's called Malcolm Gladwell. And he was saying that a small group of bikers in New York City had the state in paralysis. I think there were 50 guys in the club. And at one point in the 80s or 90s, the state of New York was having conniption fits over these guys. And, it could have been just a good story, but,
Well,
this is interesting that, Tim, you're in Serbia, kind of, and then looking back to then, we're seeing what's happening today, and it kind of makes much more sense than what you saw back. How many years ago was that? 30 years ago?
I was part of that perspective. I watched the movies. I believe television. And I said, hey, I went there saying they are the enemy. If there's an enemy I could have, they would be it, and that's why I went. You know what I mean? To challenge the idea of the concept of enemy. And it was an incredible time. I mean, write about it. But my point is that everyone we met, I met a lot of people casually, but anybody I had a conversation with, it wound up in tears. The whole country was traumatized. I mean, aerial bombing. There's nothing that will unite a country more than aerial bombing, because there's so much terror associated with it.
Right.
And the thing is that all the people in the country experienced it at the same time. So they're in the bunkers, they're huddled up together, they're in the basements, they're wherever they can be where they feel the safest, but they're scared to death with all their friends. So when it ends, you have all this trauma inside you, and you really can't tell anybody, because everybody says, well, I felt this, I was there with you, what are you complaining about, kind of thing. But when a stranger comes along, and I had the idea, when after it was done, it was just like, you felt like not so much the voice of God, but more like the ear of God, because you could hear them. And every time they tried to explain it, they'd break down and cry, because they were just so much emotion. And that means from the leaders of Otpor to the lady in the, in the antique store, to the driver, to, there were just these different people that I met. But as soon as you tell them you're an American, and they said, we thought you were our friends. We've got whole communities of us in the United States. You go to Chicago, there's little Serbia. There's all these little ethnic enclaves of Serbians all over the place. So anyway, we were I could go there as somebody that drank the Kool-Aid to hate the Serbians, and I'm standing there and this, anyway, without getting into the nuts and bolts of the story, but that's basically what I'm writing about. So it's a retrospective, a spiritual retrospective of all kinds of things. It's a spiritual retrospective of even the whole prophetic thing, in prophets, all that kind of stuff, which to me is a fascinating thing. But now I get it. I understand that most of Christianity and most of Christian prophetic, everybody loves the future. Everybody wants to know what's going on in the future. And I'm like, Well, that's not going to do me. That hasn't done me much good. All it's done is made it easier for me to trade my present into somebody else's idea of the future instead of me paying attention to the now that I'm in a dynamic sense, taking stock of really where things are. What's going on? How's it going on? Who's it going on with? And what am I reading? Does it make any sense? What does my intuition say? And so there's an awful lot, back to this Jamie Winship stuff, about your identity. Who are you? What are you doing here? You know, are you living now? Or are you living in the future? Back in my buddy, where is he? Right here he is. My favorite man, one of my favorite writers. Here it is.
Eric Hoffer.
Hoffer.
Yes, a great read. Thoughts on the nature of mass movements. And
you know what's amazing is I'm fascinated by UFOs, so I dig into UFO community, and you get neck deep in that. And the same thing that was happening, at least while I was involved in the evangelical church, it happens. It's just human nature. They have all these they wouldn't consider it, I don't think they consider it prophetic, but they have all these kind of like, disclosure is going to happen in 6 months, a year. And it's like the same kind of mantra that we had in the church about these events that were going to take place in the future. And you pin your hopes on them only to be disappointed time and time again. It's uncanny how much this plays out. And, different groups will tell you, oh, well, no, this is different. And I believe the gospel is different, in my opinion. I believe it's something special, but I think we dumb it down to market it. You know what I mean? And I'm part of it. I was part of it.
Mike, about, what they said. It's about, it's about keeping your attention.
Yeah.
All right. That's why you have what they call wordsmiths. Okay. Wordsmiths are people that can create a fancy idea that gets your attention. And in grade school and everywhere else, we're trained to go to war. We're not trained to build each other up. We're not trained to pay attention to each other. The only thing we're trained to pay attention to is who's in charge. By the number of stripes or bars they have on their shoulders, that's who we're supposed to pay attention to. So the church, as an institution, tells us that we need to obey authority. And it's just okay. It's just what they do. It's not, I am done with beating on them, because it's just what is. It's just, they're okay. This is what they do. But it's a finite game that supports another institution of the state. I can't really, at this stage of the game, I have to kind of deal with the state in terms of its arm into the medical community. Okay? So there, I've got to deal with what I call the Egyptian priests of the medical community. And the Egyptian priests that I'm dealing with are those that basically are dealing with oncology, And I sit down with my other I meet, I'm in a world of doctors. This friend of mine, he's a doctor, and he says, I see oncologists. He says, they're like guys that mess with black magic. He says, nobody knows what to do. Nobody knows. It's just like, and, they have a certain rubric, like, yes. I talked to the doctor. I said, well, I've been taking these different things, for detox and anti-inflammation and oxygenation and stuff. And if I went on chemo, would this? And he says, Tim, stop. He says, the idea of chemo is to kill you. You're not there to soften the blow. He says, you want it to just lay you flat. He says, because that's what it's supposed to do. It's supposed to kill stuff. You can't be in there fighting the stuff that it's supposed to kill. So it's the most realistic appraisal of chemo I'd ever gotten. I said, wow.
It sounds very medieval.
Well, our sister-in-law, who went through chemo and radiation, she had a tumor in her neck. She calls her brother-in-law, who's an oncologist, and she goes, hey, I'm having all these problems. And he goes, nobody knows. This is new territory, because people that go through chemo and radiation don't live this long. They don't live as long as she was one of the few that has survived for, when did she get that?
Yeah.
Early 2000s.
Years.
So
Yeah.
20 years she's lived. Most people don't live beyond that 5 to 7 or 8 year window. Now, I'm sure it's more now because they are getting more proficient with the medication and how they're doing it. But yeah, most people just don't live.
Well, you're also, even after you take it, then you've got to go back and see if you've got cancer again, because your chances of getting cancer again because you had the operation, all this stuff, are greater. So you got to pay more attention. So you just pay a higher toll, crossing that next bridge, whatever bridge it is, you're just paying a big, what is that? How much is it in New York City to cross the GW now?
Oh, I don't even know. I think it's like,
$25.
no, is it? I thought it was more like they were going to make it 50 a number of years ago, $50 in and $50 out. It's like extortion, I mean, what can you do? You got to get in there. And it was like $100, but they never did that. I think it's what you said, Chris. It might be 10 or something. It's expensive, dude. Well, just driving on the East Coast, I mean, it costs you $25 just to go 100 miles out there.
But anyway, the idea is that, it's like quality of life versus quantity of life. You want a bunch of life, you're going to pay a toll. You want a high quality of life, if where I am, and just kind of like, and here's the other side of the coin, is back to the efficacy of believing and all this kind of stuff. I have never had so much peace in my life dealing with what I'm dealing with. I mean, I've never been as focused. I've never been as happy. I mean, I'm like, wow, surrounded by lots of crazy reality. And yet here I am thinking about Jesus, in a way that he stands apart from everything. Everything I know about Jesus from before was rationalized, fractured, and denominated. Every little group seemed to own a little piece of him. I mean, I remember we're at St. Peter's. we're in St. Peter's. We're at some Maria Maggiore church, one of the very major churches in Rome. And every church has its relics. So there's some dead saint or something like that. And we're with our dear mother, who's hard of hearing. The priest mumbled something about and I wasn't paying any attention, being my smart self, Anyway, Mom says, Tim, who's buried down there? What bones are down there? I says, the bones of the baby Jesus. She says, oh, don't say that. So, but it's that kind of wild, crazy fragmentation that's gone on with, the nature of God. And the thing is that you die, and so you're the only person that can have a relationship. The idea of brokerage, spiritual brokerage, which you were kind of making, light of in the beginning, which is true. You're the only one dying. You're the only one going, And so you're the one that has to make peace with God. And it either is real peace or it ain't. It's either the real thing or it isn't. It's either you can sit in the chair and talk about it and say, it's still a big deal. Don't get me wrong. It's a big deal. But at the same time, it doesn't get in my way. You know what I mean? I know what to do. And I'm actually able to parse out things that are what I call future and now. And in a sense, you can prioritize today, what's important today. And suddenly life becomes much, much more manageable. And it's also being apart from that thing. It's like having a separate consciousness that I am not in the system. The system wants to separate my life from me, my money from me, my time from me, and my relationships from me. It wants to squeeze everything it can out of me because I am an asset to the state. So they want my money, they want my time, they want my attention, they want me to believe what they tell them. I wrote them down as Egyptian priests. Egyptian priests have the divine right of thinking. They have the official history. They are trained to interpret the mysteries. They officiate public rituals and ceremonies. You can't have direct access to the gods without them. They have, and they also execute divine wrath for those who are not following. And they control the wealth. And they determine what is sacred.
You know what's wild? NASA, when they do a launch of any particular vehicle, they actually have rituals that they do when a launch is done. And Obama showed up for one of the launches, and so they made him part of the ritual. He didn't know what was going on. I mean, he was just like, a bystander in a sense. But they said, no, sir, you have to stand here. And they say, so. It's really wild. Now, I heard this secondhand from somebody that was supposedly involved in it, but it is fascinating how these groups adopt weird little rituals, and it actually is based on some ancient ritual, I guess.
Mine is back to the elemental powers, the powers and principalities thing. Is it, I see these things as we say they're just earthbound things. I don't anymore. I'm convinced, for what it's worth, that they're elemental powers. The media is powerful because, in a sense, you can take it for what you want, but it's like there is a corporeity within the media, meaning that the people that are in the media, the people that are in power right now, one of the reasons that USAID and all that stuff's getting so much fluff is that it's cutting off their money. The reason that a lot of the Democratic people are really upset is a lot of them, it's a very, very lucrative thing to be in national politics. And it involves real power. I mean, like power, back to Madeleine Albright, she had bloodlust. They were so excited to drop these cluster bombs on the Serbians. I mean, the bloodlust was just enormous. Wesley Clark and William Cohen and Bill Clinton, all these people, Hillary, all these people just had this crazy bloodlust to drop these freaking bombs. It was just remarkable. I mean, one of the kids I talked to, he says they woke up one morning and there's these old Soviet tenements. They're probably 10 stories high, huge, 1,000 people in them. Big old things, big old ugly rectangles with laundry and little TV antennas sticking out all over them, And he says they went out one morning and there was they heard this incredible rumbling. They thought it was an earthquake or something. Went out on the porch. There was a British Harrier jet floating in front of their tenement. And they didn't know if it was going to fire a missile or not. And they just stood there in terror, and pretty soon it just blew away and just kind of leaned back. And just all these stories. There was one particular that I really thought. The city, the tenements of the town are on one side, and there's the Sava River, and then you have the downtown Belgrade. And downtown Belgrade's where all the food and everything moves. So everybody in the tenements had to go into the city or, bring stuff back and forth for supplies and stuff. So while they were bombing, this is wild stuff, at night, they would have these gigantic parties. And they would crowd the bridges across the Sava so that NATO wouldn't bomb them.
Wow.
I mean, and they did that for 78 nights.
Wow.
Everybody would go down to crowd the bridges. And you're there. And what do you feel? You feel shame. You feel bad. You feel awful.
Well, so much propaganda that what the Serbians were doing to the Croats and the Muslims and the different groups, and they played that
to everybody. I'm not giving anybody they're all individuals responding and reacting in a war zone. I'm not saying anything, but what I am saying is Wesley Clark decided cluster bombs would be good because then we don't have to, he says, we'll just kill more of them because we don't want to put our own boots on the ground, because they knew that they would lose the public relation war. But you imagine that, they couldn't find another solution to it. They couldn't tone down the media. They couldn't diplomatically, because it's just too powerful. And from that, they were able to export that trouble. The way they disorganized that little scenario in Serbia, they've been able to export that baby for the last 25 years.
Yeah, crazy.
Yeah. Yeah. This is a great Sunday message, thinking about, it's real. It's real. It's what's really going on in the world.
And I'm just saying that, that the object
Yeah.
is to keep you from being here now. And the real thing is that Jesus is here now. The kingdom is here.
Yeah.
The kingdom is now.
Right.
And you're either in an infinite number of nows, or you sold your future, your present, to someone else's idea of the future. And I don't care if you're a Baptist. I don't care what you are. I'm not picking on Baptists or
Jesus doesn't either.
or Vineyard people or anybody.
Chris is a Baptist.
A secret Baptist.
But my point is that it's about the individual, and the Gospels are pretty plain. He who calls on me, and that's it.
Yeah.
And that's all there really is.
You're in
Everything
line
else
for it.
collectively, I think it's wonderful to have good relationships with people. I'm not against pulling away or doing anything, but what I'm saying is that two-dimensional relationships don't work. They're not going to get you there. It takes all the dimensions of the relationship. It takes all the time. It takes all the effort. It takes all the blood. It takes all the life to have relationships. Either you do or you don't.
Yeah.
So, that's where I'm living right now, and I'm just trying to stay away from the Egyptian priests, and it's showing up in all kinds of different ways.
Yeah. Yeah. So everybody watching, listening, go ahead and go to Tim's Substack. All the description will be in the description below, links to his Substack. And we're really looking forward to the next article, the Serbian
Stories
story, the Polka Prophets Serbia adventure.
A python called Madaleine.
It's all going to be there.
And those pythons, they do live a long time, so it's probably still there.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of them out there.
The thing is they can swallow things whole, and that's what they did. They swallowed Serbia whole.
Yeah.
The whole thing. They captured the whole country. They didn't broker anything. They captured the legislature. They captured the young people. They captured the entire thing. They swallowed it whole.
Incredible. So yes, and you'll be able to read it on the Substack, and then on X. Tim is also on the X. All that information will be down below. Go ahead.
On X is that I'm publishing. X is exclusive to my book, Upstream Theology. So it's a reboot of my old manuscript. I've had been gathering dust for a long time about salmon.
Good.
And,
Excellent. Mike, what you got?
Padre, Figlio, Spirito Santo. Amen.
All right. Perfect.
Or, as they do in the Eastern Orthodox Church.
What? Whoa. No. Oh, no. You
The reverse, buddy. And it's Lent.
It is like that. My wife went and got the ashes yesterday. Padre, Figlio.
All right. I've got to go, my friends.
All right.
Okay. Well, thanks. See you all next Sunday.